Hey guys, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel. So the case that we're going to be going over today is probably one of the biggest. This case has gotten so much public attention, but it's also one of those cases that people are trying to get you to forget. There is literally so many details, so many layers. When I was researching this video, I just kept uncovering more and more and more, and the layers just kept getting deeper and deeper. It's insane how deep this case really gets, and I'm going to do my best to give you as much information as possible without trying to overload you, because again, there's literally so much information, and it is really insane to me that we don't know exactly what happened, but at the same time, we really do know what happened. So like I said, this video is going to have a ton of information. This case is just absolutely crazy, so let's just get started. Today, we are going to be going over the disappearance of Johnny Gosch. John David Gosch was born November 12th, 1969 in Des Moines, Iowa. His parents are John and Noreen Gosch, and Noreen was actually married before she met John, who is Johnny's father, and she had 2 children with this previous husband who unfortunately actually passed away from cancer. A lot of the information in this case comes from Noreen herself because she just never gave up in her search for her son. She was dedicated and determined to figure out exactly what happened. On September 3rd, 1982, the Gosch family was at a Friday night high school football game where Johnny's 2 older brothers were playing, and 12-year-old Johnny was sitting in the stands watching. He was sitting with his parents, of course, and during the game, Johnny decided to go to the concession stand to get some popcorn. His parents gave him a couple dollars and he was on his way. Now, Johnny was gone for quite a while, so John, his dad, got up to go kind of figure out what was taking so long. He had found Johnny standing by the concession stand actually talking to a police officer. They were having a pretty lengthy conversation, but we don't actually know the details of this conversation. After finding Johnny, he asked Johnny to stand by the football fence so that him and Noreen could keep an eye on him. Obviously, they knew that Johnny was 12. He didn't necessarily want to sit with his parents, so they said as long as he's standing by the fence and that they can see him, then it would be fine. So Johnny went to stand by the fence so that his parents could keep an eye on him. But then all of a sudden they looked over and they could no longer see Johnny. So once again, John went out to figure out where Johnny was, and this time he was actually standing under the bleachers talking to the police officer. Because Johnny just kind of kept wandering off and not listening to his parents, John told Johnny that he had to go sit with them. So, of course, he did. Now, once the game was over, the family was heading out to the car. Johnny pointed over to the police officer that he had been talking to and said, "That police officer was nice, and I think I want to be a police officer when I grow up." The reason Noreen remembers this night so clearly is because she thought it was a little off that he kept going back to this police officer to hang out with him, and that police officer was taking some sort of special interest in Johnny. September 4th, 1982 was a pretty normal day for Johnny. He went to the movie with his friends. They had a nice family dinner that night. The whole family was home, including his older sister, who was visiting from college, and his older brother. Noreen said that this was a rarity in the household that all of them would be together at one time. Noreen said it was such a nice time as a whole family. They were having great conversations, laughing, and just having a great time. But little did anyone know this would be the very last time that the entire family would be together ever again. So young Johnny was actually a paperboy for the neighborhood. He would wake up early every single morning and go out and deliver newspapers with his father. However, the night of September 4th, Johnny actually asked his mother if the next day, if he could do the paper route by himself. Now, of course, he was only 12 years old, so Noreen didn't really feel comfortable with him going out by himself, so she said no. She told him that his father needed to go with, and he seemed seemed pretty normal. He's just like, okay, and he just went to bed. However, after he went to bed, he actually got up from his bed, came back downstairs to give his mother a hug and said, "I love you, you're the best," and then went back to bed. Those were the last words 12-year-old Johnny would ever speak to his mother. Another strange thing that happened was that around 1:30 a.m., so the very early mornings of September 5th, they received a call that John answered. All he said on this phone call was, yes, all right, okay, and then he hung up. When Noreen asked who it was, John just said that it was the wrong number. She didn't really think much of it, so she just went back to sleep. However, the kind of weird thing about this is that this is not the first call that they've received like this. They had actually been getting calls around the same time every Sunday for weeks. So that morning, September 5th, Noreen was awoken to a bunch of calls coming in from a bunch of neighbors asking her where the newspaper was, saying that the newspaper had never been delivered. Now, of course, at first, Noreen didn't really think much of this. It's very possible that Johnny could have just overslept or was running late or something like that. So she got up to check on him, but then soon realized that he was not in his room and the wagon that he always took with him was gone. Now, Johnny's father, was not with Johnny, despite the night previously Noreen telling him that he had to go with his father. Now, I know that John was a little bit more receptive towards Johnny going on this paper route by himself, and he kind of disagreed with Noreen. He said that it would be perfectly fine if he went by himself. So I'm wondering if John let Johnny go, kind of said, don't tell mom, be back before she wakes up, she'll never know, and it was just kind of one of those little secret things between a dad and his son. I know that a lot of dads will let their sons do things that their mothers didn't really want them to do because they assume that it was just harmless, it was no big deal, and maybe the mom was just being a little bit overprotective. Or maybe Johnny snuck out by himself without letting his mom or dad know, since he really did want to go by himself. We don't really know the story of why he went without his father. I couldn't really find any information on that. So I don't know if John knew that Johnny went out without him or if Johnny just didn't wake him up and then kind of went by himself. Anyways, that morning when he did leave for his paper route, he took his wagon that he always took the dog with, and tied his dog to the wagon. Now, at this point, Noreen was fully freaking out, but John was still trying to remain calm, and he was thinking, maybe he's just running late on his route. It's no big deal. I will go find him and help him finish up his route. He basically said, you can stay here, just finish up making breakfast, and we will be home soon. So, of course, John set out to find Johnny and find him on his paper route. However, after a while of being out, John came back and he was absolutely frantic. He ran into the house in a complete panic and was just yelling, "Johnny is gone." So, of course, this set everybody into an absolute panic. John had found Johnny's wagon only 2 blocks away from their house with the dog still tied up and the newspapers still in it. He shouted, "Call the police, something happened to him." So, of course, they called the police. Now, people were still calling the household asking where their newspapers were, so John went out and finished the paper route and delivered the rest of the papers while Noreen sat back and waited for the police. Now, Johnny was not the only paper boy in the neighborhood. There were actually several other paper boys that also delivered papers in the morning. So while Noreen was waiting for the police to arrive, she called a bunch of these other paper boys to see if they had seen him that morning. And a few of them actually did around 5:45 a.m. So here is what a few of the paper boys had said. So all of the paper boys that claimed to have seen Johnny that morning all had the same story. They said that a 2-toned blue car pulled up to Johnny, asked for directions, but Johnny just kind of ignored this person and then just kept walking up with his wagon and headed towards the stop sign. A neighbor claimed to have seen the same 2-toned blue car stop and then back up to meet with Johnny to talk to him. And then he said that the two just spoke briefly.
John apparently left the residence sometime around 5:45 as a neighbor reported hearing a wagon being pulled through the back of his yard. Mike was picking up his morning papers and noticed a car stop and then backed up to the point where John Gosch was walking, and it appeared that John spoke briefly to the driver of the vehicle.
Now, the paper boys were all just kind of folding up their papers at the corner when a man named John Rossi came up to pick up some papers that his children were going to deliver. He said that he actually talked to the man in this blue car. He said that he saw Johnny and two other boys at the time and that he was the only adult there. He said that he saw Johnny talking to the man in the blue car and that Johnny actually asked John Rossi to come over and help the guy in the blue car with directions. And the car actually made a U-turn and sped off.
I was there that morning. There happened to be a car on 42nd Street, and there was a guy in there, and he was talking to Johnny Gosch. Johnny said, "Hey, can you come over here and help this guy?" And all of a sudden, this car just swirled. He made a U-turn, took off. I thought it was kind of strange that he would do that.
The vehicle is described as a two-tone blue two-door Ford Fairmont.
That car came back. The man in there asked directions.
I think I told the police he looked like he was mad about something, but who's to know?
Johnny knew that something was weird, so he said that he was scared and he wanted to go home. Now, after John Rossi left, the paper boys were still there, and they claimed to have seen the same blue car flash its headlights 3 times. Now, as Johnny was walking away, 2 of the paper boys claimed to have seen a man come out from in between 2 houses, cross the street, and then start following Johnny down the street. They kept walking until they could no longer see Johnny and the man, but they did hear a dog growl. Now, after Johnny and the man were out of sight from the original 2 paper boys, 2 more paper boys came down the other street and passed by Johnny and the man. They said that they saw Johnny slumped over in his wagon, but they were in a hurry, so they just continued on with their route. This is when a neighbor claimed to have heard a car door slam. The neighbor, named PJ Smith, claimed that after hearing this door slam, he saw a silver and black Ford Fairmont start up and then make a left turn without stopping at the stop sign, and then the car was just gone.
The next 2 people that see him are 2 juvenile newspaper carriers. They say, "Hi, Johnny." He says, "Hi." They proceed to where the newspapers have been dropped.
At about this time, P.J. Smith reported hearing a car door, and upon sitting up in bed, he observed a silver and black Ford Fairmont start up from the area where John Gosch was last seen and made a left turn after rolling through the stop sign without stopping.
The paper boys then walked over to the same corner that they had last seen Johnny, but at this point, all they saw was Johnny's wagon and his dog, and Johnny was nowhere to be found.
Those 2 newspaper carriers, they get their newspapers, turn around and walk back by that same corner, and when they walk by, a wagon is there with the newspapers. No Johnny.
Now, all of these witness statements came from people that Noreen was going around and interviewing while she was waiting for the police to arrive. Despite being only 10 blocks away from the Gosch household, police took over 45 minutes to show up. And that is just the beginning of this shoddy police work. Now, as Noreen was telling the police officer what was happening, the police officer actually told her that she had to wait 72 hours before she could actually file Johnny as a missing person. The police kept being kind of condescending towards Noreen, saying that he must just be a runaway. One of the police officers actually said to Noreen, "Has Johnny ever run away like this before?" Like, everyone around the neighborhood knew that Johnny would just never run away like that.
It didn't seem like he was going to run away.
No, everything looked normal. The only thing was his car, I don't know.
And they just thought, like all cops do, it's a runaway. The kid ran away. No, this kid didn't run away. Johnny was our paper boy. Knew him, knew his parents, been out to dinner with him. Johnny would not run away.
However, despite multiple testimonies from witnesses and the fact that he just abandoned his wagon with his dog still tied up, police were insistent that Johnny had just run away, so they just left. Now, I just want to take a minute and say, despite whether they think it's a runaway or not, now obviously it doesn't seem like a runaway to me at all anyways, but even if police did think that that's what it was, why wouldn't they still search? This is a 12-year-old boy we're talking about, not some 18-year-old who just decided to run off. Even if this 12-year-old did decide to up and run away, why aren't they still searching for him? He is still in danger whether he chose to leave or not. He's 12 years old. He obviously doesn't have very many resources. Plus, even if he did run away, there is still a high likelihood or possibility of something happening to him while he's alone. So why didn't they look for him? Why did they just leave even if they did think that this was a runaway? I will never understand. Now, I will get into this later, but many people think that the police were probably involved in some sort of way. Think back to the police officer that Johnny just kept hanging out with the night of the football game, and now this incompetency from the entire police force. Just keep that in mind. So anyways, around 3:30 p.m., almost 9 hours after Noreen originally had called the police finally showed back up to ask for pictures of Johnny. Before this, the family had not heard anything from police for this entire 9 hours. Police did go to other houses for questioning, but the neighbors reported that there wasn't really much effort put into this. The police didn't take any notes. They didn't have any sort of notepad with them. They didn't really ask any good questions, and they just overall seemed completely disinterested. The police chief of this department also told Noreen to just stay home, don't talk to the media, don't go out on searches, things like that. So not only were they not trying to search for Johnny, but they were actually trying to prevent other people from going out and looking for him. Noreen said that police told her that Johnny would be listed as a runaway until she could prove that Johnny was in danger. She could not believe this, and neither can I.
We were told by government agencies, well, you have to prove that child's in danger. To us, he's a runaway until you prove he's in danger. You can almost go into a state of mind where you don't want to talk to anybody ever again. Not trust anybody ever again.
However, despite this, Noreen was not going to go down without a fight. She gathered a bunch of other people from the neighborhood, and they all went out searching tirelessly for Johnny. They got as many people as they could involved, and again, police officers were acting absolutely, completely suspicious. One of the police officers actually stood up on a table and shouted, "Everyone just go home, stop searching, he's just another runaway." Basically, just actively tried to get people to stop searching. It was completely ridiculous. Now, again, Noreen was not going to give up. She was always out there and wanted to do everything in her power that she could to find Johnny and bring him home. However, to other people, she kind of seemed like she wasn't playing the role of this depressed and crying and torn apart mother like they thought that she should be. People just said that she did not seem sad enough. She went on the media, went on TV, and made public pleas, and people thought that she just looked completely emotionless.
I think that our son was taken off the corner of 42nd and Marcourt. I don't believe for 1 minute that he ran away or walked voluntarily with anyone. He just wouldn't do that. Johnny, we love you. We're waiting for you to come home.
Please let us know what you want as far as anything that we can do to have John return home to us safely.
We're leaving the porch light on every night. Moms are like that. Take care, babe.
People really did not like her for some reason, and people gave her a lot of crap for the way that she was. But again, police were doing nothing for this. Police were doing nothing to find Johnny, and she did not want to give up. She was pushing other people to help. She was being extremely upfront and pushy towards other people, and she just wanted to keep Johnny in the public eye. All she wanted was to find her son and for people to care. But people mistook this as being too out there and stoic and not sad enough for their liking. Despite searching and doing absolutely everything in her power, police not only did nothing to help, but they called her crazy and just criticized her. I can't even imagine losing your son, and then not only will no one do anything about it, but they're actually out there calling her crazy, being judgmental, and just nitpicking every little thing that she says or does. Honestly, where was this criticism in the media for the police that were doing nothing? A few months after going missing, Noreen says that Johnny was actually spotted in Oklahoma. Apparently, a young boy cried out for help to another woman before being dragged off by two men. Obviously, this has not been confirmed, but I just thought I would mention it. So, of course, there was absolutely no evidence, no leads in this case, and the only people really looking was Noreen and John. Everyone else believed that Johnny had just somehow walked off, never to be seen again. However, on Sunday, August 12th of 1984, so almost 2 years later, another paperboy named Eugene Martin went missing around the same area. Eugene was around the same age as Johnny, and just like Johnny, he normally went on his paper route with his older brother, but this day decided to go off by himself. Witnesses have claimed to have seen Eugene talking to a man who looked to be in his 30s at around 5:45 that morning, just like Johnny. And then around 6:15 that morning, his paper bag was found on the ground with all of his papers still inside. Once again, just like with Johnny's case, people started calling his mother, telling her that they had not received their papers for that day. When someone went out to look for Eugene and found only his bag, that's when people realized that he was missing, and they filed a police report.
3 years ago today, Gene Martin left home to go on his paper route. He was last seen at 5 o'clock in the morning at his delivery corner at Southwest 14th and Highview. The case was remarkably similar to the Johnny Gosch case. Both boys were 13 and both were delivering the Sunday paper. Johnny Gosch would be 19 now. Eugene Martin's 17th birthday is next Tuesday.
The similarities in these two boys' disappearances is just absolutely insane. They are basically the same exact time of events, 2 years apart. So of course Noreen thought that Eugene's disappearance could be connected to Johnny. So in a way, this gave a little bit of new hope to Johnny's case.
Is it possible that the same person kidnapped both boys, or is that just a coincidence?
It's possible. At this point, they have not determined whether there is a link between the two cases yet, but there's a great many facts that are very striking.
Are you hopeful that the trail for Eugene Martin might lead to Johnny too?
Yes, we are.
The media also started wondering if there was a connection between these cases, and a milk company actually put the two pictures of Eugene and Johnny right next to each other on the milk carton. Noreen was hopeful that the search for Eugene would lead to finding Johnny as well. So in 1985, there was a dollar bill that came out, and it said, "I am alive, love Johnny Gosch." A woman had received this bill in a store in Iowa and sent it off to police.
The lady called us one night about 9 o'clock at night, said that she had received this bill and change at a grocery store in Sioux City, Iowa. And I asked her, would you please send us the bill? I'll send you $1 back for it. That's what she did.
The signature is right in this area.
He was somehow able to communicate that he was still alive. It was just such a helpless feeling.
People think that it's very possible that this dollar bill could really be Johnny, but of course, as always, it is possible that this could just be someone playing a sick joke. On March 29th, 1986, yet another boy went missing from the same area. Mark Allen was also around the same age as Johnny. Mark Allen told his mother that he was going to be walking to a nearby friend's house. However, he never actually showed up to that friend's house, and he has not been seen since.
The 13-year-old left his home on Southwest Emma Avenue to hang out with friends, maybe taking a movie. And that's the last time his family ever saw him.
He walked out the door, and the kids were getting ready to have pizza. And I'll never forget it as long as I live. The last thing he said to me as he walked out the door was, "Save me some pizza, Mom. I'll be hungry when I get home."
Nancy Ellen says she watched her son walk down the sidewalk, past the bushes, and then he was gone.
And he waved when he got to the bushes, and I waved at him, and that was that, and I never saw him again.
Again, this is extremely similar to Johnny's and Eugene's cases, so it is thought, of course, that the three cases are connected. Now, in another crazy turn of events, in 1988, the Gosches received a typed letter from Idaho that they believed to have been from Johnny. In this letter, the author wrote that he was Johnny and that he had been kidnapped. He said that his hair was dyed, he had a new name, and that he was forced to do awful things. The letter was then signed Johnny Gosch.
We received a letter, a 2-page typewritten letter, and it said, "Dear Mom and Dad," and then it went on to say, "I'll never be permitted to be returned home. They've cut my hair, they've dyed my hair, I look different." And it was signed, "Love, your son, Johnny Gosch." From the time Johnny could write, he always signed little notes like to Mom and Dad, "Love, your son, Johnny Gosch." And the reason I think he did that was because his father's name is John, too, and that was his identity.
In 1989, another huge break in this case came when 21-year-old Paul Bonacci came forward to his attorney, John DeCamp, and said that he was actually in the car that kidnapped Johnny. He said that he was forced to help with the kidnapping. And of course, Paul's attorney believed him, so they actually ended up meeting with Noreen and speaking in private, and Noreen said that Paul knew things that he could have only known if he had talked to Johnny. He claimed that Johnny had a scar on his tongue, a burn scar on his leg, a birthmark on his chest, and gave other descriptions of Johnny that have never been made public.
When Paul Bonacci first surfaced, I needed some time before I could go to the prison and sit down and meet with him.
I feel so good. I feel so bad about it because what they made me do.
There's just been so many things that Paul has shared with us that would have been impossible for him to know had he not been with Johnny.
Now, apparently, Paul had been sexually exploited from a very young age. He had an extremely abused background and was actually diagnosed with dissociative personality disorder, or better known as multiple personality disorder. Now, DID, or multiple personality disorder, is basically when a person has two or more prominent and distinct personality states. It's an extremely interesting disorder, and there is research that says each personality can have different handwriting, different memories, different preferences, and that different personalities may or may not be aware of the other personalities. Each personality has different preferences, and there's actually been research that shows different intelligence levels between personalities. One of the main causes that leads people to developing this disorder is experiencing extensive childhood trauma and abuse. Basically, one personality can be the protector of another. So when they're going through these traumatic events, one personality takes over and acts as a protector for the person. It's basically a coping mechanism, and despite these personalities being pretty much made up in childhood, they stick with them throughout their life, and they don't really have conscious control of when one might take over the other. Now, some people can control the different personalities, but a lot of people can't. It's an extremely complicated disorder, and especially back then, it was not well understood, and honestly, it still isn't to this day. A lot of people believe that people with this disorder are just making everything up. They are choosing to switch between these different personalities, but honestly, you should look into this disorder because it's extremely interesting, and there's so much research and evidence that shows that this is a real disorder that people suffer from. So because of Paul's diagnosis, the FBI and police did not think that he was a credible witness. Apparently, he could only remember certain things under certain personalities, and he could control which personality took control. So in his interviews, he went through these different personalities and basically told them what happened through the different personalities. He said that he put chloroform over Johnny's mouth, and that's how they got him.
24-year-old Paul Bonacci, a victim of sexual abuse since the age of 6. He is himself a convicted sex offender and has been diagnosed with multiple personality disorder.
I can hear what these other personalities are saying and stuff and the things they've done. I mean, like with Johnny and...
We spoke to Benassi recently at the Nebraska State Prison. He showed us dozens of portraits drawn and signed by the personalities which haunt him.
This is a bunch of the different personalities right here.
It is only through these personalities that he remembers the day he helped kidnap Johnny Gosch.
Every time he would put his head down and call up somebody, it seemed authentic. It seemed to me that he couldn't fake that. This guy probably wasn't capable of coming up with all these voices and all these different things to say.
Benassi says child pornography, sex magazines, and films involving children as young as the age of 6 had always been the reason behind Johnny Gosch's abduction.
I felt sorry for him because I thought that he was going to probably go through more than I did.
Again, many people didn't believe him.
After viewing our unedited interview, West Des Moines police say Benassi said little to prove that he had first-hand knowledge of the crime. There is no way right now that you can say, I'm convinced and we got to go talk to him. You can't say that at this point.
I can't myself at this time, no.
And of course, we don't know 100% whether he is telling the truth, but he literally went step by step of what happened, drew a map, named a bunch of different names of people involved, and basically told the story of this giant pedophilia ring. Now, of course, this is just my thoughts, but why would he just make this up? At the time that he came forward, he was actually already in jail for sexually assaulting another young boy, but there was absolutely no incentive for him to come forward with this information. There was no reason for him to just come up with a lie like this. There was no money incentive or shorter sentences involved. He literally just wanted to come out with this because he knew what happened. Why would he just pretend to have DID, and why would he just act like certain personalities could remember certain details? Why would he go through and create this fake map of a pedophilia ring for no reason? Plus, how would he know all of these personal details about Johnny that Johnny's mother himself said that he could only know by talking to Johnny? I personally don't think that he's straight up lying. I don't know if we should just take him for his word in everything that he says, but I do think that police should have looked into him and listened to his stories. But again, because of his DID, no one believed him. So in 1992, America's Most Wanted decided that they actually wanted to take on the Johnny Gosch case. The TV show met with Paul Bonacci, and Paul told him that there was this huge sex trafficking ring who was taking little boys and basically forcing them into this life of sex slavery. Of course, the police continued to discredit Paul and did absolutely nothing to actually help this case. Now, the TV show actually took Paul to this house in Colorado where he claimed that they were all kept. On camera, you could tell that he was just absolutely broken up about having to go back into that house. He did not want to relive this again, and again, why would he just pretend to have all these emotions about this house if he was just making it up? Once they got in, it was basically this dug up underground area, and in the wood, there was a bunch of carvings of little boys' initials.
We went to Colorado with Bonacci. You know, he said, I'll show you the house where they used to keep us. And there it was.
So what happened here? No. I almost couldn't do it to even go near the house because I got up there and the memories flooded back.
Before we went in the building, I described it. And there was a little grate. We pulled the grate off stuff and they looked under and they're like, oh no, there's the hole.
It's abandoned. We go underneath it, and sure enough, there's this chamber dug out under the house with kids' initials carved in the wood.
It was extremely disturbing, but once again, the police refused to look into this. The FBI and the police absolutely refused to even answer any questions about this case. Now, the absolute biggest shock to this case came in March of 1997 when Noreen heard a persistent knock on her door around 2:30 a.m. This is when she saw a young man standing outside of her door. She said that just by the look in this man's eyes that she knew exactly who it was. From the other side of the door, she asked who it is, and he said, "It's me, Mom, it's Johnny." He also apparently opened his shirt and showed her the birthmark on his chest. At this point, he would be 27 years old. Noreen told Johnny that she wanted to call for help, but he said, "You can't, they'll kill me if they find out that I was here." He told her some of the names of who was involved, and some of these names actually matched the names that Paul Bonacci gave, and said that he escaped a sex trafficking ring after years of abuse, brainwashing, and unspeakable trauma. And after only a short amount of time, Johnny had to go. Now, Noreen at first did not tell anyone that this happened because, again, everyone already discredited her, called her crazy, and she knew that no one would believe her. However, about 2 years later, she was actually testifying in court for Paul Bonacci's trial, and Noreen was asked about what happened. She told them, and of course, people think that she's just making this up. Despite this, she said that despite escaping, he will have to live under different identities and disguises because he knows everyone that's involved and is just scared for his life.
I did see Johnny in March of 1997. He came here very late at night.
Noreen Gosch says her missing son Johnny knocked on her apartment door without any warning almost 2 years ago. But why wait 2 years to reveal this stunning news? Well, Gosch was in Omaha on Friday testifying in the civil trial of a man named Paul Bonacci. For years, he's told the Gosch family he knows what happened to Johnny Gosch. Noreen Gosch was on the stand confirming Bonacci's story when the bombshell dropped.
The attorney asked me if I had had any personal contact or, in fact, had seen or talked to my son. And I was under oath, so I had to answer. He told me how he was kidnapped. At first, he was so drugged that he didn't know where he was at, but he could then relate some of the names of the people that were around him, that he was able to latch on to names. He told me how they traveled all over the country. They were used for pornography, prostitution, compromising businessmen and politicians sexually. These kids were used in a royal fashion like none of us would ever dream of. I know that there are people in this town that don't believe it. They don't want to believe it, so they say Noreen Gosch is nuts. I don't care. I simply don't care. My first responsibility is to my son, because I'm the only one he has left.
Now, a few years later, in September of 2006, Noreen received a bunch of photos on her doorstep of a bunch of little boys that were bound and gagged. One of these photos showed a boy with human branding on his shoulder. Noreen believes that it is very possible that some of these photos were of Johnny. I have seen the photos, and I do think that some of these photos really do look like Johnny. These pictures are honestly extremely disturbing, but when I saw them, the pictures were actually pretty clear, and you could see their faces pretty well. Now, some of these pictures were actually said to have been from a website that had child pornography and that they were not connected to Johnny at all. And one of these photos was actually of 3 boys that were tied up. But a letter was actually sent to the Des Moines Police Department, and they said that they were actually a picture of 3 boys in Florida who were challenging each other to an escape contest. Now, apparently the police did investigate these pictures, and they actually interviewed the children in the photo that I mentioned about being from Florida, and they said that the story matches up. However, there was one photo that Noreen was confident was Johnny. It is very possible that the other pictures in this group were just thrown in to throw off police or maybe as some sort of sick joke, but we honestly don't really know. Now, that is pretty much all of the information in this case. It is absolutely insane how much the police screwed up this entire thing. There's absolutely no way that Johnny just ran away, and there's no way that police actually believed that he ran away. So there is really one main theory in this case, and then there are a lot of smaller little theories within this one big theory. Now, obviously, the biggest theory is that Johnny was kidnapped and put into this massive pedophile ring, and that Johnny is probably still alive out there. Many people don't want to believe that these giant pedophile rings exist, but they do. And to this day, it is still a huge problem. In 2013, there was actually a big pedophile ring in Des Moines, Iowa that was busted, and police saved 105 kids from child sex trafficking. Unfortunately, neither Johnny or Mark or Eugene were found. But it was a huge deal, and I am so glad that these 105 children were saved. The scary thing is that just in Des Moines, in this one pedophile ring, there were 105 little boys forced into sex trafficking. It is estimated that 300,000 minors are forced into sex trafficking every year in the US. This number is absolutely terrifying. So going back to the big theory of him being kidnapped and placed into a sex trafficking ring, one of the theories within this theory is that the reason the police did such a crappy job is because they were involved. It's not crazy to believe, since we know that sex trafficking goes way up into the government. Just how far up it goes, I don't really know. But again, it does happen. The West Des Moines Police Department that investigated Johnny's disappearance had a history of corruption. Police officers had very sketchy backgrounds. They got into fights all the time. One of the police officers in this investigation actually showed up to one of the searches drunk. He was actually the one that stood up on the table and told everyone to go home. And they were involved in so many sketchy things that they should have been fired for, but they weren't. I won't get too far into this police department's history of sketchy behaviors for the sake of time, because I really want to get into an even higher level of corruption in the government. Remember Paul Bonacci? Like I said earlier, he was forced into sex trafficking, and he said that he took part in Johnny's kidnapping. He claimed that this ring's leader was a man named Lawrence E. King. He was the director of the Omaha Franklin Credit Union in Nebraska. Paul claims that him and Johnny, along with many other young boys, were taken by a highly organized global pedophile ring. And again, he said at the very top of this was Lawrence E. King.
You think Larry King knew who this boy was? Yeah. Why do you think he knew? Because he was the one responsible for bringing this out there.
The FBI looked into him as well as many other high-ranking government officials. Now, this accusation actually brought them to trial, where the jury found this accusation to be a carefully crafted hoax. Paul was charged with perjury, and King was not indicted on these charges. However, he was indicted of fraud and was accused of taking $40 million from the bank. However, many people are very confident that there is this massive pedophile ring that is run by all of these government players. Now, this shows just how deep this gets. I can't get into too much detail about this for the sake of time, but there is an entire book written about the Franklin cover-up that involves devil worshipping, cannibalism, sacrifice, and a whole bunch of other just really disturbing things. Now, once again, no one really believed Paul, but Noreen does. She believes that Johnny was taken by this highly organized sex trafficking ring that involves corrupt police departments and government officials. This stuff is just insane.
It is a major cover-up.
We can't get law enforcement help. This is when we need it. We can't take somebody to court without them, and they know it.
Now, like I said earlier, many people believe that Johnny is still alive. In one of these theories, people believe that Johnny Gosch is actually a man named Jeff Gannon. Jeff Gannon was a columnist for the Bush administration. Now, he was given a daily pass for White House briefings, but he didn't really have an extensive journalistic background. So people were really questioning why Jeff, out of all these different people, got this incredible opportunity, this rare opportunity to be in the press briefing room, despite not really having much experience with journalism. People really had no idea who this guy was until they started questioning why he was allowed in these press briefings. Apparently, he also had history of being involved with a gay escort service. Now, a lot of people think that he really does look a lot like Johnny, but remember, this is 30 years later. We don't really know what Johnny would actually look like at this point, but when he was asked questions about who he really is, he did act a little bit sketchy. Apparently, he has similar body markings to Johnny, and no one really knows anything about his past. Now, he claims that he is not Johnny Gosch, and when asked if he would take a DNA test, he said yes, but he never actually has. He also said in an interview that he was 48 years old, and actually by now he would be in his 60s, but Johnny would actually be about 10 years younger.
Jeff, one question for you. Let's get right to the point. Are you willing to take a DNA test and settle the controversy once and for all? Yes or no?
Absolutely, I would definitely take a DNA test, but that isn't even necessary because there's so much evidence available to disprove these accusations.
That's a yes, then.
Well, he's saying yes. My friend Jeff is saying yes.
As a lawyer, I can smell a
No.
hitch.
You got to understand something. My friend here, Jeff, who's come on our show today, didn't do anybody else's show. He's going to tell us the facts. Jeff, how old are you, first off?
I'm 48 years old.
48 years old. My man Johnny Gosch there would be 35 years old. Lisa,
why
the
are you
numbers.
Avoiding the question?
No. He just said, hey Jeff, you said you would take a DNA. I could set this whole thing up, but let's get to the point.
There are dozens of people who have known me most of my life that could definitely vouch for the fact that I am not this person. Look, what happened to this child and the suffering that his mother has endured is a tragedy. But it's also been very difficult for me and my family, my real mother and members of my family who have had to listen to these fabrications being spread in newspapers, on television, and on the internet.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a question, not Bo. Jeff, are you willing to take a DNA test, yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes. When I cut my finger yesterday, there was plenty of DNA available. You should have stopped by.
Can you understand why people would think that you're not always telling the truth? Your name isn't what you said it was. Then the liberal blogs come out and say that there's a different story. You resign. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but can you see that people may not know that you're telling the truth here?
Well, I think people who are listening to nameless, faceless people making accusations on the internet, I'm sitting here in front of your cameras today to answer your questions. Where are these people? These people hide behind screen names on the internet. I'm here. I'm willing to give the evidence and tell my side of the story. Frankly, I haven't had the opportunity to tell my side of the story. Any time that I've made appearances, people have protested my appearance, tried to shout me down. I had to go 6-on-1 2 weeks ago at one event. It's my turn. Why don't people believe me as opposed to some of these other people?
Your friend Bo Dita believes you. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show today and clearing this thing up. We'll do this DNA thing, and I'll make my friend Lisa here see that you are in fact who you say you are.
Noreen isn't really sure if she believes that this is Johnny. She would like a DNA test to be done, but until then, she will never be sure.
I do not know if Gannon is Johnny or not. Only a DNA test would provide that information conclusively.
Now again, his past and his behaviors are a little bit sketchy, and he very well could be Johnny, but it's also possible that he's being sketchy about something else. I mean, just because he doesn't want people looking into his life doesn't mean that he's automatically Johnny. He very well could be just hiding something completely unrelated and doesn't really want people poking their heads into his life. So we really don't know. So those are pretty much the biggest theories within this case. Basically that the police and the government were extremely corrupt and had everything to do with this, and that Johnny is still alive out there, and he may even be this Jeff Gannon guy. Now, I personally believe that Johnny is still alive out there, but it is possible that despite wanting to see his mother, despite wanting to go home, that he just can't. Again, if this really is this massive sex trafficking ring with all of these high-ranking government officials, he could be putting his family at risk by coming home. He simply knows too much. He went through the most traumatic thing that I can even fathom. And it makes sense that he would just want to protect his family from it. Again, if there's all these massive players in this case, it's possible that if he came out and said anything or named names, that he would be killed or his family would be killed or something else. I mean, who really knows? I think it's pretty obvious to me that this kidnapping was an orchestrated and planned thing. There were multiple different cars that people saw, multiple different men that people saw, and these people were somehow able to take Johnny Gosch seemingly in front of a bunch of other people and still somehow never be seen ever again. Now I really want to know what you guys think. Do you think that Johnny was forced into this massive pedophile ring, or do you think he was kidnapped by someone completely unrelated? Do you think that the police were involved, or do you think that they really are just this incompetent? Do you think that the government could be involved, or do you think that he was just kidnapped by these random people who have nothing to do with the government or a sex ring? Do you think that Johnny is alive out there, and do you think that it's possible that Johnny could be this Jeff Gannon guy? Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm really excited to hear everyone's thoughts. Now, this is such a giant case, and even with how much information I tried to include, this is just the absolute tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more to this case. This is one of those cases that I got absolutely sucked into and spent hours researching, because as you look into it, you just unravel so much more. And if I had all of the time in the world, and if I could make this video as long as I wanted, I would totally just go into everything in complete detail, but I can't. I don't have the time for that. But I urge you to look into this a little bit more, to do your own research, because there is just so much information out there. It is insane the amount of information we can find on this case. I honestly believe that this does have corruption. It has the government. I think the police were involved. I actually think that it's extremely unlikely that the government or police are not involved, because of how much information we know and the fact that we still don't know where Johnny is. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if there is any important or big information that I forgot to include, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to learn even more about this case. If you guys did like this video, please make sure to leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. With that, I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!